Every story has to start somewhere. This one starts with pencil lines on paper, sketching the outline of a shed, crooked, patched, full of ghosts and sawdust. It'll sit about the same size as the greenhouse I made for my grandmother, Mildred. But this one's not made for growing. It's made for remembering. I never met him. Clarence died before I was born, suddenly, at 53. He left behind a wife, 3 sons, a half-finished life, and an unfinished cabinet. And he also left a kind of silence, I think. The kind that families carry like a box too heavy to open, so they just move it from place to place. So this isn't a memory project, not exactly. I'm not recreating something I once saw with my own eyes. I'm working from what I've been told. Fragments and flashes, softened by time and bias and love. A photo of him in his Navy uniform. A poem he could recite from memory. The way my dad's voice used to sound when he talked about losing him. For the rest, the missing pieces, I've given myself permission to imagine. Not to rewrite him, but to round him out. To fill the shed not just with tools, but with possibility. This isn't the truth, but it is a truth. A version of him seen from the far side of time. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to bring him home for a little while. My grandfather Clarence was born in 1917 in the same township as Mildred. He chased her through church picnics and ice cream socials, always 2 steps behind, until finally, eventually, she let him catch up. But his story started even earlier with a woman named Susie Benedum. I found a photo. Clarence, maybe 3 years old, in a tiny sailor suit. A card accompanied the photo, and in neat handwriting it said, "This is, as you can see, a lovely mother and you." She died not long after that picture. Tuberculosis. Clarence was 4. His father, Arthur Brown, was a big-time farmer. That meant responsibility, land, people who worked for you, decisions to make, but not maybe much time to parent a grieving little boy. So Clarence was raised mostly by his older sister, Elizabeth. Auntie to me. She was 14 when she started raising him. He was 4. I can't imagine, and yet, somehow, I don't think it was grim, not the way Mildred talked about it, not the way my dad and uncle did. Auntie was patient, kind, devoted. She kept things gentle. That gentleness stayed with Clarence, I think, even when the world tried to roughen him. Eventually, Arthur remarried. His new wife's name was Chloe. And then, when Clarence was old enough to manage on his own, Auntie moved to Knoxville. But he and Auntie stayed close all his life. There's something in that I want to remember in the way I build this shed. Because Clarence was a complex man, handsome, charming, wildly confident. But under all that charisma, there was also someone who had once been a tiny boy in a sailor suit, holding tight to a teenage sister's hand. That's a hard thing to carry forward into manhood, and still, it shaped him. He was a Navy Seabee, a carpenter, a tree surgeon, a diabetic, a devilishly handsome man with a Clark Gable grin and a head full of poems. They called him Pennywell when he was little. If you gave him a penny, he'd recite a poem. He was the kind of person who could drive anything. Claiming as much got him behind the wheel of a road-building machine in the Aleutians, and later behind the controls of a plane he somehow managed to co-own, even while broke. He died young, 53. That story is coming, and so is the one about the airplane, and the one about the poetry, and the fight, or maybe it was just a constant debate, between intellect and love that played out over decades of marriage. But today, I'm just sketching the shed. This crooked little building will be a stand-in for all the places he worked, a composite of every outbuilding, every corner of every shop where he fixed and tinkered and bartered and dreamed. It won't be tidy. He wasn't tidy. But it will hold stories and tools and maybe a memory or two that isn't mine to keep, but I'm going to try to keep it anyway. This time I'm starting with a sketch. Not because that's how I've always done it. Far from it, actually. My first build was my dad's library. I started with the books, tiny shelves, tiny paintings, a fireplace, his checkerboard table, even a replica of his stereo. I made all the pieces I could remember, all the ones that felt like him, and then I built the room around them. It worked out, somehow. A little bit of luck, a lot of feeling my way through. The greenhouse I made for Mildred started as a kit. Just 4 walls and a roof from an Etsy seller. Everything else I invented as I went. I was working full-time, going to school full-time, and occasionally veering off into polymer clay side quests. Those 2 projects took me over a year and a half. I don't mind long projects. In fact, I sort of love them, but for this one, for Clarence, I'm trying something new. Planning. I'm laying out the bones before I start decorating the soul. I pulled out my sketchbook and drew what I could. It's not fancy. I'm not a trained artist, but I do know how to hold a memory still long enough to pin it down. The shed is plain, a little crooked, quiet, but sure of itself. I made notes. Should the back be open like a dollhouse? If so, the workbench has to go on the right, and the left wall will hold 2 cabinets, one glass-fronted, flaking with age, the other an apothecary cabinet, full of drawers and wonder. There's something comforting about seeing it this way before it exists. A plan, a promise. It's less masterful drawing and more like a map. I don't think Clarence would mind the janky perspective or the crooked lines. I think he would be happy to have a place again, even if it's tiny. As I start laying out the bones of this shed, the studs and rails and door frames, I keep thinking about Clarence as a boy. Pennywell, they called him. If you gave him a penny, he would recite a poem, just snap, off the top of his head. He had hundreds of them memorized, maybe thousands. That kind of memory, that kind of rhythm stays with a person. And I keep coming back to one poem in particular. Not one he ever recited as far as I know, but one I wish he had written down on the wall of his shed. Desiderata. The part that always catches in my throat is, "You are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. You have a right to be here." And later, "Listen to the others, even the dull and ignorant. They too have their story." Clarence had a story, a complicated one. He wasn't always easy. He wasn't always well, but he was loved and he was loving. And even now, drawing these tiny walls to hold his memory, I can feel the shape of him forming in the space between each board. This shed is a miniature, and it's also a poem for a penny. A way to say, I see you. I remember. You were here. Clarence had a story. And if I've learned anything from poems or pop songs or the back corners of my own memory, it's that everyone does. Listen to others, even the dull and the ignorant. They too have their story. It's easy to tell the stories of those who are always kind, or heroic, or always graceful, always just so. But the harder stories, the messy ones, the ones that don't fit into tidy narratives or holiday toasts, those matter too, maybe even more. Clarence was brave, charming, infuriating, tender, complicated. He built things, broke things, tried again. He had a pilot's license and a shoebox of poetry in his head. He was loved fiercely and sometimes frustratingly by people who had to live with the whole of him, not just the best parts. He had poems in his pocket and sugar in his blood. He left too soon and too much behind. But he was here, and he was real, and he's part of the tapestry of me. Everyone has their story, even the quiet ones, even the flawed ones. That's why I build these rooms. Not because the people were perfect, but because they were here. And remembering them, really remembering them, is a way to love. I don't know hundreds of poems, but I do know a million song lyrics. I like to take the lyrics and bend them to a situation I'm in. I guess that's the influence of memory master Clarence and Mildred the wordsmith. So with that in mind, I wrote him a poem. Kind of. It's based on Desiderata, but Clarence's version. For the men who could drive anything, and the women who remembered them anyway. Go quietly into your workshop, even if the world is loud and leaking. Build something, even if it's crooked. Speak plainly. Recite poems for pennies. Leave the door open if you're tired of being right. As far as possible, without surrender, hold on to the people who love you when you're difficult. They are your ballast, your fuse, your folded up flight path. Tell the truth, unless you can trade the truth for something better at the co-op. Let your charm be honest. Let your bullshit be funny. Avoid loud, aggressive men, unless they're your sons, and then teach them how to sharpen a blade and how to say I'm sorry. You are a child of the fields and the stars, raised by a girl who should have been playing with dolls, built by loss and laughter and rust. You have a right to be here, even if you forgot to go to the doctor, even if you left too early, even if you never finished the damn cabinet. Hold peace in your hands like an old wrench, useful, comforting, a little worn. And whatever else you do, fly when you can, drive what you dare, and memorize something worth reciting when the pennies come in. So that's the start of Clarence's shed. Just lines on paper for now. But behind every crooked board, there's a story I'm trying to remember, or imagine, well enough to keep. Maybe you have someone like that too. Someone you never met, or didn't know well, or didn't understand until it was too late. Someone you remember in pieces, in phrases, in glimpses. If you've got a story like that, one that lives in the corners of your memory, or the gaps of your family photos, I would love to hear it. Drop it in the comments if you want, or just say their name out loud. That counts too. I'll be back soon, with boards and glue and sawdust. But for now, thank you for being here, for witnessing the start of something, and for remembering with me. If this story found you, if it reminded you of someone you loved or someone you're still trying to understand, I hope you'll stick around. There's more to come, more rooms, more memories, more tiny echoes of the people who shaped us. Thank you.